Truth, logic, action, power. It's the GreggHoush Show here on New Revolutionary Radio. From the Leonard School in Malden, Massachusetts, Gregg and company are here to bring a sense of ethics to your news. Whether it's politics, activism, or current events, we always seek to inform and never to deceive. Let's start the show.
All right, and welcome to episode 56 of the GreggHoush Show. I'm here with co-host Mac. The currently still absent Kayla is not with us this week. We'll figure that one out someday.
Yep.
At some point, it's just going to become this running joke, like, 100 episodes from now, still no Kayla. But for now, that is where we are. There's, all kinds of interesting, fun stuff. But I think, one of the most important stories to me is the ZTE story from this week.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially the relatively late-breaking developments.
Yeah, so Trump issued very specific through the Commerce Department sanctions basically against ZTE until 2025, saying that they could no longer get the U.S. hardware and technology they needed to keep making their phones. Now, they were the number 4 smartphone vendor in the U.S. and I think number 2 in China.
Yeah, they actually weren't doing all that well in most of Asia for the most part. Their phones weren't super popular, but they actually managed to get very popular, relatively speaking, in the U.S. by targeting the market segment that was going for like non-contract smartphones.
Yeah, so, ZTE is gigantic, $17 billion in annual revenue, 75,000 employees. And some of their employees, a specific arm of the company, decided to use the company as a way to filter technology to Iran and North Korea. So ZTE was using Qualcomm chipsets for their phones, and in these phones, you have to have one of only maybe 2 or 3 chips that actually exist out there to really run the whole thing. And so Qualcomm own a very large percentage of the phone world, including most of the Android phones, and they were told you can no longer get these chips because you keep sending them to North Korea and Iran, which we aren't, cool with. And there was a deal made with the company where they would stop, and then they didn't. And so they were cut off at the knees. And we said until 2025, you get no more U.S. tech.
And that meant not only the Qualcomm chips that they were relying on to actually manufacture the phones, but all the Android software
operating system was taken away as well.
So they had neither hardware nor software. They were just
And so a
screwed.
75,000 employee company was basically shutting down. I mean, they were shutting down major operations, but I mean, to them, that really meant 70,000 plus of those employees going away.
Yeah,
literally the company was dead.
They were saying that the employees were like showing up like once a week to like routine training meetings, and then the rest of the time we're just staying in the employee dorms because they had nothing else to do.
There was going to basically be no more company, and at the end there was going to be a little shell left over to clean up the rest of the mess, but that was about it.
Yeah.
And of course China went nuts, like, what are you doing to us?
Right.
It's gigantic.
And I mean, this was compared to the U.S. threat of tariffs on Chinese goods and stuff, that doesn't really bother them that much. They have ways of dealing with that, and it's just like it might lead to a trade war or something like that, but it's not a direct threat of other countries being able to say, hey, we can just shut down major businesses of yours overnight.
So China has been subsidizing a lot of local technology in their country in attempts to make it where they don't rely so heavily on U.S. technology, especially in the chip sector. And we've been, of course, fighting that through every kind of backroom deal our government can make with their government to stop just giving free money to these companies so we don't, lose out on the trade. And I don't think that's going to go on anymore. I think China's just going to see this as the United States literally tried to take one piece of technology, maybe 2, away from one of our giant corporations, and 75,000 Chinese people are about to lose their jobs. So that means that the U.S., just with the stroke of a pen, can kill one of the largest companies in China. And of course, China is, sitting there like, what? What do we? No, 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 no.
Yeah.
And so now President Xi and President Trump are now talking about maybe saving the company and fixing this problem.
Well, I mean, Trump already tweeted out his backing down of things, saying that, President Xi of China and I are working together to give massive Chinese phone company ZTE a way to get back into business fast. Too many jobs in China lost. Commerce Department has been instructed to get it done.
So sanctions for the absolutely wrong thing you did. Oh, wait, that too big to fail, I guess?
Yeah.
So we're going to have to undo those sanctions?
And I mean, the thing that, first of all, it's not like ZTE didn't, deserve to have something happen, because they definitely, what they did was not really a thing that we want happening.
And they did it knowingly and on purpose.
Yeah, there was not an accidental thing. It was definitely intentional. So on the one hand, going after them specifically, yeah, definitely 100% justified. On the other hand, the way they went about it and the implications it had to China suggests that it really wasn't very smart from our perspective. Claire Reed, former U.S. Assistant Trade Representative for China Affairs, said that essentially the ban was a shocking blow to China's leadership and was a much bigger deal than the threats of tariffs. She said, quote, "Imagine how the United States would feel if China had the power to crush one of our major corporations and make it go out of business. China may now have strengthened its desire to get out from under a scenario where the United States can do that again." End quote. She also said that even though, ZTE was probably foolish in not understanding the consequences of what they were doing, it really makes it a lot less likely that China will make concessions on U.S. demands in the future. So, really, this was like, hey, China, let's remind you of that thing that we could have done at any time. Oh, we didn't realize we were doing that. We're going to back down. And now China's like, wait, you could do that? I don't think I want you able to do that.
They really thought they had the position of power when it came to not only the trade agreements, but the ability to pull back from all other things. Like just even the rare earth minerals alone that we have to get out of them right now. Like they really thought they had that position locked down. And then suddenly we just showed our hand.
Yeah. And we literally just showed our hand and then went, oh, wait, my bad.
Yeah, I just don't look at it. Yeah, it's a royal flush, but don't look at it.
Pretend I didn't
you can
show
have
you
the
that.
pot. You can have the money. Yeah, no, it's you got to look at it this way. Imagine if China made literally one decision, and the head of their government just with, one sentence out of his mouth, and suddenly, Target went out of business. You think Walmart's kind of bigger than them, so Walmart would be like, Huawei over there, the bigger phone company.
Right.
And then, ZTE like Target, like just below them. Just imagine China saying basically one thing and boom, Target's out of business.
And then,
nationwide.
That's
the power that we just showed them we had over one of their giant companies.
And then, of course, we did that. They did that over a trade conflict, and in response to U.S. violating some sanctions stuff. Well, Target specifically violating it. Yeah. But then once they realized that they were shutting down Target, they went, whoa, wait, never mind.
Yeah. What does that show? We showed how strong we are, and then how weak of a spine we have?
In every possible way, this was an insanely bad set of decisions.
In every way this could be looked at, it's bad for everyone involved.
Every way you can think of that someone might have tried to salvage something from this, it got fucked up at some point.
And that's what you get out of a Trump presidency.
It really is.
That's ZTE right there, guys. That's that's crazy. So here we are sitting on this massive power to really do something to China if we get upset, and we show it. And then we pull it back because, no, we didn't mean it. Sorry. Yeah, okay, cool.
I don't.
What does that show them for next time?
I would say I don't understand the strategy there, but that's because I realize that there isn't a strategy there.
So now Kim Jong-un and Trump are meeting, and they've chosen Singapore as kind of the third party.
Yeah, which, sort of makes sense. It's over in the general vicinity. It's more or less neutral.
Jong-un doesn't want to travel far.
Right, because he hasn't traveled much to begin with. And but it's still a very, close U.S. ally.
Strong security.
Yeah, very modernized in many ways in terms of amenities. And of course, it's one of the few countries that really does a whole lot of geopolitical negotiation with North Korea. They actually have a North Korean embassy and have since the 1970s.
I just think, we're in this spot where surprisingly positive news is coming out of North Korea for nearly a month straight now, in terms of just every step forward has been a step forward for a solid month. And in one more month from now, Trump is going to sit down with Kim Jong-un. And I get this impending doom feeling.
Sort of Damocles.
There's this buildup of amazingly good steps that might finally, I don't know, start to feed the population of that country for, just one. And what we're about to hit is Trump sitting down with their leader. And
which should be the last thing that anyone invested in peace.
I don't
here
see how
wants.
that keeps going good. I don't see how that leads to any positive outcome.
I mean, I guess the one bright spot of news there is that I feel like, Kim Jong-un is kind of the more self-aware version of Donald Trump. Like, yeah, he does all the same personality bullshit, but he seems to like, he was raised specifically to be the leader of North Korea. Like, this is how you stay in power. So like he seems to understand it. He's like, oh yeah, no, I'll do all the crazy shit, but like I know that this guy doesn't mean anything that he says.
Yeah.
Like, so he's not going to be the like just because of his own personal position, he's sort of the best person to be in that sort of negotiation with Donald Trump, because he's not going to take it all that seriously.
We're going to walk away with this with slightly opened North Korean borders, and a new Trump Tower in Pyongyang.
Yeah,
Trump Tower hotel goes up, and that's that. I'm calling it now. His whole play here is to get a Trump Tower in North Korea.
I would believe it. I would not be. I would not be surprised. And I will say, there that gives about that 30 to 50% shot that 20 years from now, Kim Jong-un is the legendary statesman of North Korea for having reintegrated it successfily into the world. And all it took was giving Donald Trump.
We still just look at pictures of Kim Jong-un pointing at stuff, though, because those are my favorite pictures.
I mean, that's basically just where politics is headed at this point.
Yeah. So look forward to staying at the new Trump Tower, Pyongyang. One of the more interesting things that is happening, though, in terms of just strangely positive kind of vibes, the denuclearization, the test site being torn down. And what's interesting here is that they have announced that they are going to allow the press to come, and they are not going to monitor, follow, or send handlers with them. They are going to allow the press to travel alone to the site, be at the site, write what they want, and leave, with no editing and no censorship of what's leaving the country. And that'll be a first.
Yeah.
An absolute first.
Of course, when you have a collapsed nuclear testing site where you've, removed everything important or it's been destroyed, you're not really super worried about what the press can see there.
Sure, it's just the first time they've allowed free press to happen.
It is a very interesting development in the regards of the rights of the press. It's just you can see why they wouldn't be super concerned there and might be a little more open to the idea. It's not like there's a whole lot that that can be used to, I don't know, undermine the regime or something like that. You can't use that to report on living conditions in North Korea, or the kinds of things that North Korea is usually worried about.
So in 2020, we'll be moving our offices to the second floor of the Trump Hotel in Pyongyang, coming to you live from North Korea. But for now, staying heading continuing in that direction as we go through China, North Korea, and now over to Iran.
Yeah, because
where Trump has, in air quotes, killed the Iran deal, but not really.
Right.
So he's gotten out of it from America's side, but they're still signed to that same deal with multiple other countries.
Yeah, and all the other countries are like, well, we still want the deal. What's wrong with...
So all those other countries are still working to keep the deal in place, which means Iran will still have to live by that deal. So all we've done is removed ourselves from the negotiating table.
Yeah, we just walked away our position from our ability to have any input on the matter.
So just all he did literally was weaken our position.
I mean, he did put the deal at risk too. And it was an important deal that was helping to keep Iran from actually developing nuclear weapons. Like, there's not really any upside to what happened here. It's bad in every possible way. It doesn't do anything good. It only does bad things. The question is just a matter of degree of severity.
Good. It only does bad. That sounds like a president we have.
That does sound suspiciously like the president we have.
So Israel and Iran currently are having a proxy war through Syria by randomly blowing up each other's stuff in Syria.
Yeah, and that was something that we didn't really have go. Well, I mean, we previously already had kind of the proxy war, but it was really a proxy war. It was only the proxies fighting, and now we have, Iran actually targeting
Israeli installations in the Golan Heights.
Right. And meanwhile, Israel's actually attacking Iranian targets in Syria.
So that'll end well for all of us. That's just what we wanted right there. So
that does not,
on that happy note,
does not sound anything like Austria-Hungary invading Serbia.
Yeah, about that, Wow. So, Trump suddenly, just like a decade ago, a little more than that, started spending like cash like mad.
Which is very interesting because we know that wasn't how he does business.
Also, it was at large enough sums that it didn't look like cash that he had liquid on hand, like in terms of just suddenly he can spend that amount of cash out of nowhere without liquidating something.
Yeah. But I mean, like, even beyond the sheer volume of cash, just look at like George Ross, who was a senior counsel who advised Donald Trump for 25 years, wrote a book called Trump Strategies for Real Estate in 2006. And in it, he talked about how Donald Trump approaches business. And he summarized Donald Trump's attitude towards debt as, quote, borrow as much as you can for as long as you can, end quote. They went on to say, quote, when Trump invests in a real estate project, he typically puts up less of his own money than you might think. Typically, his investors in the project will put up 85%, while Trump puts up 15%. Now, the same year that this was published, Trump suddenly changes that. Even though that's how he's done business literally his entire career up until that point.
So the Washington Post puts out an article about this.
Yeah.
Last Saturday.
Right.
And they basically break, their story regarding this. And they say that Trump spent more than $400 million in cash on new properties, including outright purchasing 14 properties in full without borrowing from banks.
Yeah. Which is exactly the opposite of what he's done up until now. At every point, he didn't bring in any outside investors, didn't get any borrowed money from banks, nothing, all from their own coffers. Suddenly 400 million. And the really interesting part here is the timing of it, because it starts with a $12.6 million estate in Scotland purchased in 2006, and then over the next 2 years buys up a couple homes in Beverly Hills. Well, all of that makes sense, especially since Donald Trump is big in real estate, and this was in the height of the real estate bubble. It makes perfect sense for him to be buying up more real estate. But then the financial collapse comes, and, real estate gets pounded. He shouldn't have spare cash in the first place. He should be having problems making all of his leveraged debt payments, like, if anything, like all of the other real estate investors are at this point. But instead, between 2009 and 2014, he proceeds to buy 5 golf clubs along the East Coast, a winery in Virginia, and then actually ramps it up more in the 2010s. In 2014, he spent $79.7 million for golf courses in Scotland and Ireland, which have continued to lose money while he renovated them since then, involving pumping in another $164 million of his own cash to keep them running. This is not how anyone does business.
I would put air quotes around his own cash again there too, because I just don't believe it.
No, it doesn't make any sense. And I mean, Eric Trump told the Washington Post that none of the cash used came from outside investors or from selling off major Trump organization assets. And he claimed that it was just the licensing deals and commercial buildings that they already had that produced so much cash flow that they had all of this money to throw around. And just none of this makes any sense in terms of the timing, the excuses being used. I mean, the fact that he's saying that none of it came from outside investors or selling off major Trump organization assets makes sense that he would acknowledge this because, well, that's basically a matter of public record. You could just look up to see if that was the case. So of course he's going to acknowledge that. But all of this sounds exactly like what someone that was laundering money would be doing, straight up. No, like
Absolutely.
100% is what this sounds like, especially given that, for example, Ed Walter, a Georgetown University real estate professor and a former chief executive of Host Hotels, was quoted as saying, I still think at the end of the day, you want some debt when you're pursuing major projects, private real estate firms, stuff like that. And professor of real estate finance at MIT, David Geltner, said, quote, for privately held real estate firms, basically they like to use as much debt as they can. The only brakes are put on by the lending institutions who don't want to lend too much, end quote. Now, we do know that Donald Trump was having trouble getting any lenders willing to loan to him at the time. He had gotten...
Keeps going bankrupt, of course.
And gotten like a $260-odd million loan from Deutsche Bank around this period. And, none of the U.S. banks wanted to work with him. He was having to go all to overseas financing. So that part of things, really the only possibilities here are, one, he literally just no one was willing to work with him. Or two, he was...
Possibly laundering lots of money for something.
I can't see it. In terms of a change of investment or business strategy, like they're trying to play it off as, simply doesn't make any sense.
No.
None of the timing works out, the way that they went about it, the reasoning, none of that makes any sense. The only plausible explanations here are that literally they had to borrow, or they had to do it that way because they couldn't borrow money, or that they were laundering someone's money. I can't see any other realistic explanation there.
See what Mueller thinks of it.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll hear.
Right?
It might take us another year or so, but
I think we're going to hear on that one.
Yeah, that seems likely. It's not the only thing we're going to hear more from Mueller on. We had some real interesting stuff this week there.
Michael Cohen is just the gift that keeps on giving.
And thank you, Michael Avenatti, for delivering that gift.
He's, Avenatti's just working on the Stormy Daniels case, but he's not. He has decided that everyone's going down on this one. And so, various bits of information that he's been given because of the case that he's involved in with Stormy Daniels, he has worked with the press to get out there, and they have only expanded upon once they learn these things.
And there's still more. He has new tweets from earlier today that hint at future revelations that haven't come out yet. But boy, should be exciting. But
a lot of pictures on his Twitter today.
Yeah, some interesting ones. But what we already got was already fantastic. I mean, this is on the one hand, not necessarily all that surprising, and yet in terms of the level of unsubtlety and gall involved in signing up for this, it's kind of impressive, because it turns out the Essential Consultants LLC, the shell company that Michael Cohen, set up to pay out Stormy Daniels and women that Trump was sleeping with in general, wasn't just doing that. It was also taking in a bunch of money since the election, all from various companies.
All that wanted insight into Trump.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because that was the excuse used by one of them. We've had 4 different excuses, 3 of which don't make any sense, and one of which sounds awfully like they're trying not to use the word bribery.
Yeah, so we have Novartis, we have Korean Aerospace, we have Columbus Nova, and we have AT&T. AT&T was the first one that most people heard about, as it was really the easiest one to put forward to the American public, as everyone knows who AT&T are.
Right, and initially that was reported by Avenatti as having been around $200,000 paid to Cohen, but it turned out that it's more like $600,000. AT&T is the one that used the excuse about how they paid Cohen for insights into the Trump administration.
They said it was a mistake.
Oh, yeah.
And they fired the person supposedly responsible.
Who, of course, was a senior executive vice president or something.
Totally
be out at
not
some
the
point
CEO.
Soon. Yeah. Definitely wasn't the CEO losing their job there.
Yeah.
And they have interestingly said that, by the way, the Mueller team contacted us back in November of last year, and we had some conversations over the next couple of months about all this.
In fact, so do the other three.
At least a couple of them have.
Right.
We know that Novartis said that.
Yeah.
Novartis, that's a hilarious one to my mind. So they paid Michael Cohen $1.2 million. Now, I'm just going to quote from the statement they released because it's just so comical. What they said is, quote, Novartis believed that Michael Cohen could advise the company as to how the Trump administration might approach certain U.S. healthcare policy matters, including the Affordable Care Act. The agreement was for a fixed term of 1 year and paid essential consultants $100,000 per month. In March 2017, we met with Michael Cohen under this agreement. Following this initial meeting, we determined that he would be unable to provide the services that Novartis had anticipated related to U.S. healthcare policy matters and decided not to engage with him further, end quote. And then they went on to explain that, but we looked at the contract and we couldn't see any way to get out of it, so we just kept paying him $100,000 a month for the next, almost a year.
They got 1.2 million, but once they met him, they decided, this guy's an idiot.
But the part to my mind is that, their excuse is that this multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company's lawyers are so bad that they drew up a contract with a lawyer from the worst law school in America where they hosed themselves with a contract that they couldn't get out of. Oh. That is the excuse they want us to believe there.
That's called a lie.
That is called a transparent lie. One that, if you think about for even a couple of seconds, you realize that they aren't even trying to be believable.
Wow.
So they also admitted to being contacted by the special counsel. Now, the interesting one, I think, is that it's interesting because there's some tantalizing bits that there's so much we don't know about it yet. And that's the situation with Columbus Nova. Now,
they're an investment company.
Right. And we originally heard about them because Avenatti tweeted out saying that a company controlled by a Russian oligarch with close ties to Mr. Putin had given Cohen $500,000. Well, this became kind of controversial. The company put out a statement talking about how they were solely owned and controlled by Americans and that Michael Cohen and their deal with him had nothing to do with any Russian oligarchs or anything like that. 100% untrue. Well, then we found out that it turns out they've kind of scrubbed a lot of stuff from the web on this. Archived version. So the Russian oligarch in question is Viktor Vekselberg, and his company is his holding company is the Renova Group. So an archived version of their website listed
Renova Group's website.
Yes, listed Columbus Nova as a subsidiary of theirs. Also, an archived version of Columbus Nova's website described it as a U.S. investment vehicle for the Renova Group. And then there's the fact that a 2006 SEC form signed by the CEO of Columbus Nova, who I should mention is also the cousin of Viktor Vekselberg, called it, quote, the U.S.-based affiliate of the Renova Group, end quote. So their entire excuse about how being, solely owned and controlled by Americans is pretty paper thin. Basically, Vekselberg is by far their biggest client, and quite possibly, we don't really know, just pretty much their only client. The company is practically owned and run by his cousin, Andrew Intrater, who incidentally also happened to donate $250,000 to Trump's inauguration and another $35,000 to a joint fundraising committee for Trump's reelection and the RNC. Oh, and Intrater, along with Vekselberg, attended Trump's inauguration together, along with Michael Cohen. Oh, also, just coincidentally enough, Mark Kasowitz, the longtime Trump personal lawyer who doesn't have a huge number of clients, kind of works pretty limited selection of people, also represented Columbus Nova in cases between 2010 and 2017. So there's a bunch of
connections.
Weird connections here. And, people trying to cover up some of these connections, but we don't really have any hard details to put to this. This one is just kind of one of those, it seems like a weird thing that we'll hear more about. But boy, are there some interesting just little tidbits there.
There really are. So another Russian oligarch and another big sum of money somehow landing at Trump's feet, basically.
And everyone trying to scrub all these connections so then deny them, even though it's
Even
very
though it's
easy to prove.
Yeah, easily proven. So Pence, being his typical idiot self, has called for an end to the special counsel investigation of Robert Mueller.
Yeah, which, you'd think that he would be a lot more interested in not reminding people of the fact that he exists.
He said, in the interests of the country, I think it's time to wrap it up. Of course, Pence is just deep in all of this.
Oh, of course. He was handpicked by Manafort to become vice president.
Is now under, indictment,
right.
basically.
And Manafort is very much a central figure in all of this. And Manafort literally faked a mechanical problem on a plane to get Trump to meet with Mike Pence in the first place, rather than just going with Chris Christie. He was the head of the transition team. He was, you remember that part where, of course, Michael Flynn was fired in mid-February, resigned, whatever, he was fired in mid-February 2017 for having lied to Pence about the discussions of sanctions on Russia during the call between Flynn and Sergei Kislyak. Well, he was reporting as late as mid-January Flynn's account of things, but he was the head of the transition team, and we now know that Flynn's testified that he kept high-level officials in the Trump transition team informed about his dealings with Kislyak, and even followed instructions from a senior member that various news organizations have identified as Jared Kushner to speak with foreign ambassadors, including Kislyak, about various things. We know that that Sally Yates had reported to him about the issue. We know that Flynn told Trump's transition team on January 4th, 2017, almost about 10 days before, Pence went on TV and recounted Flynn's account of things, that he was under investigation for not having announced that he was a paid lobbyist for Turkey. And Pence would then go in March and claim that he didn't know about the Turkey thing. So, we know that Pence has been either just the world's biggest idiot with the people that were supposed to be under him talking with each other and his boss, and just not keeping him in the loop on any of this, except some of the things where we know that he knew and just lied to us.
Well, they must have been in rooms where there was only one woman, so he had to leave because it wasn't
clearly,
his wife.
Yes. But it's not very plausible, any sort of excuse that he didn't know about. Maybe not the full, everything that was going on, but at least enough that he had some idea. So him calling for, in the interests of the country, I think it's time to wrap it up with regards to the Mueller investigation. Boy, does that sound an awful lot like a certain talk that Nixon gave right around
Slightly.
what was that? That was late 72, I think.
Yeah. Pretty close to the end.
So yeah, it was getting there. Just before the court case that where they upheld that he had to turn over the tapes and then he resigned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good job there, Pence.
Yeah.
Sounding like Nixon. That's who you want to emulate right there.
I thought that Pence was in this to, be the president once Trump get kicked out. But
it looks like he'd rather spend some time somewhere else, like Leavenworth, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know what he was thinking there, but I guess it's pretty consistent with his history. He never really been all that clever.
I'm somewhat sick of talking about what a complete royal piece of shit Scott Pruitt is.
But boy, does he give us so much material.
Nonstop. It's
new stories every time.
Since when did we hear this much about the person in charge of the EPA? Normally there's a news story once a year, maybe.
Yeah,
but this guy
last time we had anything like this on an EPA administrator was what? Heck of a job, Brett. No, that was FEMA.
FEMA, yeah.
Yeah, I can't even think of one that's on this scale with the EPA.
So he travels in unbelievably expensive Black Hawk helicopters to
visit coal mines at events the press isn't invited to and actually isn't allowed at.
They they revise how the National Ambient Air Quality Standards is done, placing more weight on economic costs of the goals and their impacts on energy development, and reducing the weight placed on their impacts on human health. So basically, your air can get more polluted, and your kids are going to all end up with asthma and lung cancer.
I mean, I just want to throw in the quote from Paul Billings, the Senior Vice President of Advocacy for the American Lung Association, because this is how he described it. Quote, "This has been the dream of the polluter since the 90s, and it's the nightmare, particularly of parents and kids who have asthma or other chronic lung disease," end quote. I mean, that just really sums it up. Like, it's the dream of the polluter and the nightmare for literally everyone else, especially if you have any kind of health conditions related to air quality.
And of course, we get the revelation that last June he met with Cardinal George Pell in Australia there. Of course, 20 days later, Pell would be...
no, it was actually, I believe, in the Vatican.
Oh, they met in the Vatican,
No,
but he was indicted in Australia.
Yes.
20 days later on sexual abuse charges.
Dating back decades. He's also, of course, an outspoken, climate science denialist, which is presumably why Pruitt met with him in the first place. But the fun part, the extra...
Keeps good company.
Yeah, the extra fun part is that the EPA later released their official descriptions of the dinner and specifically and intentionally omitted mentioning Cardinal George Pell's presence. And in fact, Scott Pruitt's former deputy chief of staff for operations, Kevin Chmielewski, said that it was a no-brainer, end quote, to keep his participation quiet. So they just basically outright lied to the public about who was involved and what the dinner was about and why Pruitt was there, everything. They also tried to claim that, the EPA didn't know that Pell was going to be there, but we actually have emails showing that they were actually expressly communicating about how Pruitt was going to be meeting with Pell.
Yeah, so again, they continue to lie every time they get caught and then lie more.
Yep. And transparently. They don't even try to make them good lies.
Yeah, I mean, and then you get the Heritage Foundation, far right group, paying for Pruitt's travel and accommodations, which is not covered. He's not allowed to do that. That's a gift. You're not allowed to take gifts like that.
Yes, and the best part is that they sent out an email from the EPA's ethics officer saying, quote, "Because the official has been invited to speak and present information on behalf of the agency, acceptance of free attendance at any meals provided on the day of the event is not considered a gift. And because it's not a gift, there are no financial disclosure reporting obligations."
Except that's not right at all.
Yeah, actually, well, I mean, that part is true. It's just that
that's not what happened.
They weren't just receiving free attendance and meals. They were also getting travel and hotels. And that, according to the executive branch ethics regulations, that all of that is collateral to the event and does not constitute free attendance and absolutely has to be authorized in advance and reported on the agency's travel report and all that shit.
Which it wasn't.
Right. And we know that they booked hotel rooms and travel and stuff for him. They also booked rooms, although we don't know if they paid for the rooms for some of his staffers, which include things like his chief of security,
his speechwriter and aide.
Oh, the guy. Oh yeah, Lincoln Ferguson, the one that got one of the big raises that Scott Pruitt totally didn't know anything about.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So taking gifts from far-right organizations for no reason, while also going and doing things like visiting coal mines with no press allowed to attend.
Yeah.
Good times. And then, in more EPA news, because I guess that's a thing these days.
Sure.
The state of Illinois, the Attorney General, Lisa Madigan, is filing a lawsuit against the EPA challenging a recently issued rule that would allow Foxconn to avoid meeting stringent emissions controls at a new facility in Racine County. So basically, the EPA has said Foxconn can pollute all at once, and the state is saying no. And is going to sue.
This is actually the second lawsuit Illinois has filed in regards to this Foxconn plant and the EPA specifically, because the EPA has given Foxconn some variety of, or even not even necessarily Foxconn specifically, but issued some variety of waiver that would apply to Foxconn at this specific facility. The other lawsuit was about how they were going to treat wastewater and metal pollution as a result. So we have Illinois suing the EPA because the EPA is doing a shit job of its job when it comes to Illinois. Thanks, EPA.
So there we go. There's more. Just it blows my mind that we have that much from the EPA and the leader of the EPA every week. But
Right? We've covered Scott Pruitt like 3 consecutive shows, maybe 4 at this point.
it's been
How
years
is there
since
that
anyone
much?
at the head of the EPA meant anything to the world other than just kind of pushing paper.
Yeah, they're supposed to be like an administrator that you don't think twice about because, well, they're administrating the rules of how the EPA
Until
does its
a
job.
crony of the fossil fuel industry gets in there and starts messing everything up.
Funny what happens when you bring in a guy who's mostly famous for repeatedly suing the EPA for doing its job to run the EPA.
Amazing. Now, Gina Haspel possibly getting confirmed, and in fact, probably now that
Yeah,
2
it
Democrats have
seems
signed on
likely.
board saying they support her.
Although we had her confirmation hearings this week, and it was nice to hear some Democrats actually, kind of putting the screws to her on the torture thing. It would have been nice to.
But they let her keep dodging the question.
I mean, they did make an effort to try and follow up. It's just she kept dodging, and they didn't, have enough that they were willing to really pin her to the wall. I mean, seriously, there was the part where Mark Warner asked about whether the CIA interrogation program was consistent with American values. Now, that was actually a follow-up from some previous conversation in there where she said that, where she talked a bit about American values, but she said in response to this question that America's changed since September 11th, and now we've decided to hold ourselves to a stricter moral standard, and she supports that standard, which doesn't actually answer the question about whether the CIA interrogation program was consistent with American values in any way, shape, or form. So then he followed up asking how she would respond to being asked to do things running counter to her values. And she said, well, I would never, ever take the CIA back to an interrogation program, and that she wouldn't put CIA officers at risk by asking them to undertake risky, controversial activity again. Which still doesn't really answered the question.
Just dodges.
And then, so he asked, if this president asked you to do something that you find morally objectionable, even if there is an Office of Legal Counsel opinion, what will you do? Will you carry out that order or not? And what does she reply? Quote, Senator, my moral compass is strong. I would not allow CIA to undertake activity that I thought was immoral, even if it was technically legal. I would absolutely not permit it, end quote. Mind you, this is someone that we know was running a CIA black site that was doing these kinds of interrogations. So if she thought it was immoral, well, it wouldn't have happened before. So then when she was questioned about this even more, she said, no, I believe the CIA must undertake activities that are consistent with American values.
Again, just dodging.
So Kamala Harris asks her if she viewed the CIA interrogation program as immoral. What does Haspel respond? Oh, the CIA worked, quote, given the legal tools that we were authorized to use, end quote. And when asked if, in hindsight, she thought the techniques were immoral, she replied, Senator, what I believe sitting here today is, I support the higher moral standard that we've decided to hold ourselves to. Again, dodging the question. No actual response. So, of all people, I mean, it was Susan Collins who, of all people, because a Republican, whether or not one of the relatively moderate ones, still a Republican, asked, saying that, Trump had supported waterboarding when he was running, and said, if the CIA has a high-value terrorism suspect in its custody, and the president gave you a direct order to waterboard that suspect, what would you do? What does Haspel reply? I do not believe the president would ask me to do that.
That's not the question.
Also, what on earth gives you that idea? He has repeatedly, expressly, on many occasions said that A, he would bring back waterboarding, and far worse, that torture absolutely works, that he would go after the families of terrorists. Since he's become president, he's questioned why they waited on a drone strike until the guy was basically by himself instead of with his family. Like, what on earth would give you the idea that Trump would not give that order. I cannot for the life of me imagine something that would give someone that impression because it's contrary to literally everything we know.
Well, obviously, it didn't give her that impression. She's just lying straight to Congress.
Right. Yes.
As everyone that Trump seems to put up in front of them does. But, we find ourselves again with Rand Paul saying he will oppose her nomination. But, what I'm learning from Rand Paul when he says stuff like that is we have no idea.
Yeah, maybe he means that when it's in a committee vote, he'll oppose it and then he'll vote for it when it's on the floor. Or maybe he'll support it in committee and oppose it on the floor once they know they have enough votes for it to pass. Or maybe he'll just vote for her entirely, or who the fuck even knows. He'll do whatever he damn well feels like, and it will in some way undermine everything he's claimed to stand for.
And then Jeff Flake, of course, is surprisingly being flaky.
Yes. To be fair, that it makes some sense in his case that he might be a little hesitant to follow his usual stance of doing whatever the Republican Party wants because, well, John McCain, as a victim of torture, is very strenuously against people that torture, and specifically called out Gina Haspel, saying that he hoped his colleagues would not confirm her. And, well, Jeff Flake views John McCain as a mentor, and has relatively been one of the Republicans that has fairly consistently spoken out against torture. So it kind of makes sense that on the one hand, he's torn between his love of bootlicking every awful decision the GOP makes, but on the other hand, he really does seem to have an opposition to torture and respects John McCain, who has an even stronger one. So
I think being tortured kind of leads you to really hate it a little more than the person who just hates it because it's wrong.
Right. That seems likely. On the other hand, since we now have, both Joe Manchin and Joe Donnelly on the Democratic side saying they're going to support Haspel, it pretty much guarantees that she's going to get the confirmation.
That is bad for everyone.
I mean, to what passes for his credit, at least Joe Donnelly didn't initially come out supporting and was had a meeting with her, and then after the meeting said we talked and I
after the meeting where the CIA agent told him what she knew, he said suddenly, hey, I'm going to vote for you.
But his justification was that they had this conversation in private, and he asked her some very pointed questions about the idea of enhanced interrogation and found that he believed that she had changed her views on the matter and would strenuously uphold U.S. law, and that one of the deciding factors from his perspective was that a number of former CIA officials under Obama's watch had supported her nomination. So while it was a shitty decision and those aren't really very good arguments, at least he seemed to have the awareness of the shame of the decision that he'd made and tried to come up with some sort of, I
like my version better.
I mean, your version.
The CIA person knows a lot about him because, CIA person, and then, tells him what she knows, and then he changes his vote.
I mean, I suspect that conversation didn't even have to happen that way.
He probably just knew. He was like, yeah, no.
I firmly, it's Joe Donnelly, senator from Indiana and general contender for one of the worst Democrats in the Senate. It is not really a surprise that he ends up supporting this. I don't really think it requires any threats or implied or otherwise from the CIA. I think this is just kind of where he was inevitably going to end up. Because he's kind of a shitbag.
So now we're getting a person who completely supported the torture program and in fact helped operate it to head the CIA.
But it's okay because she insists that she totally wouldn't do that again. Well, okay, she totally will give you sentences that sort of might lead you to believe that she wouldn't do that again if directly ordered.
Good times. Good times.
Yeah.
So, so now, what we have to talk about is somewhat positive. I mean, a ballot measure in Ohio has passed for redistricting where the people have said, stop it, you two, to the parties and said, you guys need to come together and do this a little better.
Now, the interesting thing there is that it actually had big, widespread support from both parties in Ohio.
This is a ballot measure meant to really try and rein in gerrymandering in the state.
It's actually pretty serious, too. It's a constitutional amendment to the state constitution. so that means it actually had to be approved first by the state legislature and then go to this ballot measure for approval. And it would actually make it so that you'd need, in order to do redistricting plans, there'd be like a initial set of very strict criteria where you'd have to have half of the members of each party, or each of the two largest parties, I should say, vote in favor of the redistricting plan, and overall 60% of the members of each chamber in order to get like the full 10-year congressional redistricting plan. And if they can't meet that threshold, then there's like a set of lower requirements where they can adopt one that's a shorter period and doesn't require as widespread approval. But they actually like tried to make it where, you know, they have to have both of the major parties agree to the redistricting plan, which is very interesting. Because last time redistricting occurred in Ohio, and they did a redistricting plan, was 2011, and they only needed a simple majority in each chamber. And I mean, the Republicans controlled both the House and the Senate, and also the governor's mansion. And that plan passed with the support of only 4 of the 50 legislative Democrats at the time. So they like didn't necessarily have the strongest, overwhelming, like compelling political pressure to implement this. And yet the parties actually managed to come together, at least in Ohio, and agree to these sets of rules. It actually passed effectively unanimously in the Senate. There were 2 people not voting, but everyone that actually voted was in favor, and almost all of the House, it passed 83-10. And now it went to the actual voters, and they approved it very, very nearly 3-1. It was a rounding error below 75% in favor. So overwhelmingly popular in Ohio. And
so now what we're going to get out of this, hopefully, is a fix to the gerrymandering problem there, except that, you know, there's so many stages of this where maybe it works. Nope. Okay, so they have to revote. Maybe it works. Nope, they have to revote. By the end of it, you get the very tail end of this is a vote that works the exact same as it currently does, basically.
But it only would only give a plan that lasts for 4 years, so they'd have to do it like 3 times per 10-year cycle.
Well, you know, what the hope for me is then that this one actually works. It does something that we can, you know, visibly see as positive, and we get to maybe use this as a model to start fighting gerrymandering in all the other states.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to try out.
At the very least, the states that have ballot measures.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to try out a bunch of different, you know, potential solutions to gerrymandering. You know, let Indiana try this measure. Let California use its independent board for districting. You know, let's try out some different solutions and see which one, like how they all turn out, and then we can kind of move to whichever solutions seem to work the best. I'm fine with using the 50 states as the laboratory of democracy for figuring out like what sorts of policies.
One of them is going to work.
Right. So like, I'm not going to insist on the one solution everywhere, but I'm glad to see states trying something out. And it's just kind of weird to see like both the Democrats and Republicans getting on board for one of these.
There we go, everyone. So that's all of the news we're covering this week. There, you know, I'm gonna work hard to get Kayla back for the next episode here, but we'll see how that works out. Until then, that was episode 56.
Thank you for listening. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at GreggHoush Show and on Instagram at GreggHoush. If you like what you've heard and want to be a part of it, check out patreon.com/GreggHoush Show. In exchange for funding our programming, you gain access to exclusive content such as uncut editions of our podcast. We have new episodes every Thursday night. We hope you listen in. The GreggHoush Show was created by GreggHoush, executive produced by co-host Eric Gowrays, and co-hosted by Kayla Avery. Other contributors include producer and writer Anna Jeffrey, co-host producer David McGuffin, and writer-engineer Robert Tortora. Theme music for this show was produced and recorded by Geneva de Colbert. Our interns include co-host Casey McLaughlin, writer-engineer Alec Greeny, writer Maddie Locicero, and associate producer, writer, and announcer William Kennedy. You're listening to New Revolutionary Radio, your call to action.